Soybean planting date and maturity group. These are two topics that are going to be important to pay attention to optimize soybean yields in North Carolina. We have a graduate student project currently in the program managed by Tristan Morris and funded by the soybean growers in North Carolina that is looking at the optimal soybean maturity group and seeding rate to use across a wide range in planting dates. We have soybean producers in the state that'll start planting in late March and plant all the way through late July. In 2019, we investigated a range of planting dates with maturity groups 2 through 8 planted at each planting date and seeding rates of 75,000 to 175,000 seeds per acre. This research in 2019 was planted at 5 sites across the state, in the Piedmont, the Coastal Plain, and the Blacklands. I'd first like to highlight what happened at some of our earlier planting dates in 2019. At 2 sites, we were able to plant soybeans in the middle of March, and you can see it took these soybeans anywhere from 20 to 25 days to emerge. Soil temps were 52 to 53 degrees Fahrenheit at planting at these locations, so it took a while for these soybeans to get out of the ground. This is a photo that Canning Extension Director in Union County, Andrew Balcom, sent us on April 2nd, 2019. That was several days after we had planted soybeans at that location, but the soybeans were still in the ground, and we didn't see any freeze damage at this site or any of our other sites in 2019. Freeze damage is not likely on soybeans unless they're emerged and it's been 28 degrees Fahrenheit or below for 4 or more hours. So we didn't see those conditions even when planting into mid-March that led to any freeze damage in 2019. Now let's look at some yield results from this initial work in 2019. On the x-axis here, we have maturity group all the way from 2 up to 8. On the y-axis, we have yield, and this is data combined across our 5 locations in 2019. So let's first look at what happened in an early planting situation, which we'll define as mid-March to mid-April. In an early planting situation, we saw the highest yields with some of the later maturing varieties, which is not what we had anticipated going into this trial. There's a couple reasons this might be. One of them is when you plant maturity groups 2, 3, and even 4 very early, you can see some large levels of seed quality damage as those soybeans are coming into physiological maturity in late July, early August. What happened in a full season situation for yield, which we'll define as planting anywhere from the last week of April to about the 3rd week of May. In a full season situation in 2019, we saw the highest yields with the maturity groups 4 and 5, and these were the highest yields in the whole trial. This is consistent with what we've been seeing out of our full season official variety testing results over the past few years, with a trend towards higher yields with some of our earlier maturing varieties. In a double crop situation in 2019, we also saw the highest yields with a maturity group 4. And in a late planting situation, which we'll define as mid to late July, as long as the very early maturing varieties, 2s and 3s, were avoided, yield was similar across the later maturing varieties. Another way to look at our data from 2019 would be to look here on the x-axis at our various planting dates. On the y-axis, we have yield, and within each of these planting dates is the numerically highest yielding maturity group. So you can see at our first 3 planting dates, the highest yielding maturity group was a maturity group 5. At the next 4 planting dates, the highest yielding maturity group was a maturity group 4. Why might this be? Well, when you think about when you're trying to get your soybeans to flower, you're typically targeting the longest day of the year, June 21st. One thing we noticed about a lot of these planting date maturity group combinations is that they were flowering around the middle of June. Our research team was driving around to the sites at NC and capturing beginning flowering date. So that's a trend we identified and could be one of the contributing factors to why we're seeing the highest yields with these planting date and maturity group combinations. We're getting these soybeans to flower in the longest day of the year where they can capitalize on maximum photosynthesis. I want to highlight the weather data from 4 of our 5 sites in 2019. In 2019, we've had pretty widespread drought across the state, starting in late August and moving into early October. We saw that at 4 of our 5 research locations. And I want to highlight this because this is why it's important to do agricultural research over multiple years. That late season drought inevitably impacted our 2019 results. 2019 was not a favorable growing season for our later maturing varieties. So in subsequent years, we might not see that a maturity group 4 is the highest yielder in some of our later planting double crop situations. But we intend to do this research over multiple years to try to pick up reliable trends. Yield is not the only component that we're looking at in this study. We are also looking at the impact of these planting date and maturity group combinations on seed quality. Seed quality can be impacted by things like wet conditions, humidity, and harvest delays. These can lead to issues like Phomopsis seed decay, shown here with this chalky white seed, or purple seed stain pictured here caused by Cercospora blight. So in this study, our team has been trained by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture to quantify damage in our samples the same way it's done when a farmer takes their samples to the elevator. So let's look at a little data from our Sampson County location in 2019. We're presenting damage in our samples from maturity groups 2, 3, and 4 across the planting dates in Sampson County. And what we'll see is when soybeans were planted in late March, mid-April, even mid-May in Sampson County, we see some fair levels of damage with the maturity groups 2 and 3. Significantly less with the maturity group 4 at those earlier planting dates, and damage across all 3 of those early maturity group diminishes as planting dates are delayed. So what do we know at this point? We know that manipulating planting date maturity group are going to be important to optimize yield. When our North Carolina farmers are planting over such a range of planting dates, we know that maturity group recommendations are going to vary. Our ultimate goal with this research is to conduct it over several years and create a grower decision support tool where the grower could plug in their desired planting date, and based on this data and the data from the official variety testing program, it could spit out a recommendation on the optimum maturity group and seeding rate combination to use at that planting date. We need to get several years of data to create a tool that's robust enough to do that, but that is our goal with this research. Would love to take any questions or feedback. Please contact me through any of these avenues. Thank you.